We had no idea how many people were going to ride the Lynn Ferry. I remember when we started the service, there was a post from a person on the first ferry, and the woman posted, "It's just me and my dog. You guys better get out here and ride the boat, otherwise they're going to take it away." I was just terrified that no one was going to ride the boat. And oh boy, was I wrong. Weekend ridership was through the roof. And if they didn't use the Lynn Ferry, they would have driven. Really excited to see that modal shift. They're coming to the ferry because it's good public transit.
Welcome back to Spilling the Tea, the podcast where we go behind the scenes of the MBTA. I'm Andrew Cassidy of the MBTA's Customer and Employee Experience Department, and on today's episode, we're hitting the seas, talking all things ferry with David Perry, the MBTA's first ever Director of Ferry Operations. David brings decades of experience in marine transportation and project management, and we'll hear how that background is shaping the future of ferry service in the region. From new routes and vessel expansions to right whale slow zones, we're diving into how ferry service is evolving at the T and why the ferry might just be your new favorite way to get around. David, thank you so much for joining us for Spilling the Tea.
Good to be here.
You've had a fascinating career spanning marine operations and large-scale transportation projects. Can you walk us through your journey and what led you to this new role at the MBTA?
Yeah, it has been an interesting journey. I started out, went to Mass Maritime. I graduated and worked on deep sea tankers for a long time.
Wow.
And sailed around the world on deep sea tankers. When it was time to have kids, I decided to come ashore, and I got a engineering consulting job downtown Boston and took the commuter rail for a long time into downtown Boston and kind of got involved in some transit advocacy for the commuter rail. And that's how I first got exposed to the MBTA and met some people here and decided that I might be able to help out on engineering project management. So my first job at the T 8 years ago was as a project manager in capital delivery working on commuter rail projects. I then bounced over to the new fare collection system, the Charlie system, spent some time as director of installation for the fare collection system. And when this job opened up, I jumped on it. I had no idea I'd be getting back into the maritime industry after having been gone from it for so long, but really excited to be back on the water and using the things that I learned so long ago and some of the experiences I had on big ships.
The MBTA has been running ferries for a while now, and I believe if I'm correct, it's the region's oldest form of public transportation. However, you are the MBTA's first Director of Ferry Operations. What does that role entail, and why was now the right time to kind of bring that position into being?
Yeah, you're right. The first ferry was, I think, in 1630, going across from very close to the path of our Charlestown ferry, actually. So after a few hundred years, I get to dabble in it a little bit. For the most recent past, ferry operations has been within railroad operations. And the reason for that is that there's some similarity between ferry operations and railroad operations. They're both contracted services. So railroad operations, commuter rail is operated by Keolis. Ferry operations, the operator is Boston Harbor City Cruises. So there is some similarity dealing with a contracted service like that, where the actual frontline employees are not MBTA employees, but contracted employees. And then, of course, commuter rail trains have big diesel engines and boats have big diesel engines. So there is some commonality there. And prior to me taking the role, the ferry operation was run by the people in railroad operations kind of as a side job, as an extra duty. And yes, in the recent years, there's been a focus on expansion and changing the way that ferry operations work. So they looked at it and said, hey, you know what, we need somebody to focus on this full time. So there's been great work done by the people who are still my colleagues and the people who've come before me. I was not stepping into a vacuum, but it's also great to be able to kind of have full-time focus on it and really try to figure out how we can improve it and build it and make it better for everyone.
Now, I know the MBTA works with Boston Harbor Cruises, but in truth, the MBTA oversees all these different modes, which is fairly unique for the transit space. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, as well as the relationship that we have with Boston Harbor Cruises? What's happening with the boats between point A and point B? How does that partnership work with their schedules and our schedules? And what does that day-to-day look like, again, as Director of Ferry Operations?
Yeah, it's fascinating. As far as I can tell, we are the only agency in the country that has heavy rail, subway, light rail, bus, and ferry all under one roof. A lot of the other cities, the ferry operation is a separate transit agency, if they even do have the other modes. So the advantage for us there is that I can easily coordinate with the bus. On the East Boston Ferry, we do use the East Boston Ferry as a diversion mode when the Blue Line is having trouble. And so the Blue Line guys will call me up and say, hey, we're having trouble. And I say, yep, we can run the boats more. We can ramp up our service a little bit to accommodate diverted passengers. So there's a lot of kind of unique aspects to being integrated into the system. So the odd thing is that the ferry operation, of course, is a tiny fraction of the overall MBTA ridership. But when you compare the MBTA ferry system to other ferry systems around the country, we hold our own. We're a pretty robust ferry operation, both in terms of the number of routes, the ridership, and the number of boats that we're operating. We're a pretty robust little ferry operation. So to your point about how all that works is that we own some of the boats, and Boston Harbor City Cruises owns some of the boats. So it's a little bit different from commuter rail in that aspect. On commuter rail, we own all the trains, we own all the tracks. Keolis is really just operating our equipment. On the ferry, it's a little bit different, and there are some interesting ways that plays out. On the Hingham to Rose Wharf operation, on that route, we have a unique arrangement with Boston Harbor City Cruises where they provide us with 4 boats to run that operation. Each boat holds between 350 and 400 passengers. The unique thing is that because we don't own those boats, Boston Harbor City Cruises uses those boats for other things when they're not running that big commuter service. And the other things that they use them for are excursions and whale watches. So it's a win-win. We don't need a 350 or 400 person passenger vessel at noontime on a weekday. That's the prime time for their whale watch business. So they need those boats for the whale watch. And similarly, they're not doing whale watches at 6 a.m, but we need a 400 person boat at 6 a.m. to bring in our customers. We use the boats in the morning and the evening. They use the boat in the middle of the day. It's a win-win-win. It's all the same crews. It's all the same captains. And it's really a unique way to utilize those assets in a really kind of efficient way to get us the service that we need and for them to get the utilization out of those boats that they need. And a really exciting partnership with Boston Harbor City Cruises. A lot of it is dealing with setting them up for success and making sure that they have the resources they need and the direction and the guidance they need to be able to do the right thing. And then I'm the interface for customer complaints, for, any kind of stakeholder engagement. There is a lot of stakeholders on the harbor and people who are interested in coordinating how the ferry's running. So I can kind of take some of that workload off of Boston Harbor City Cruises, let them run the day-to-day, let them run the operation, but also be there as a resource for them to handle complaints, give them guidance, deal with problems, and make decisions on how the service is going. On a day-to-day basis, I'm talking to them multiple times a day on just operational things and making sure that the service is running smoothly and making sure that I understand what's happening on the service. And then I'm talking to a bunch of other people internally and making sure that they're aware of what's going on, and then reaching out to stakeholders and coordinating. For example, we just started the Winthrop and Quincy routes as newly separated routes. And we're running those boats go into Logan Airport, Seaport, and the aquarium at Central Wharf. And so there was a lot of coordination with all of the different stakeholders at each of those different locations from Quincy and Winthrop, but also at the Seaport, where there's another ferry service that's not operated by the MBTA. So coordinating those schedules and making sure that we're not going to have a lot of conflicts at that dock with one dock and a lot of boats going to it. So that takes up a lot of my time, is coordinating with all the different stakeholders around the harbor.
You kind of touched upon it a bit as far as the different routes, but, Hingham, Hull, Charlestown, they've been around for quite a bit, but there has been an expansion of ferry in more recent years. The two that come to mind are really those that came about initially as mitigations for the Sumner Tunnel closure a couple of years back now, specifically the East Boston and Lynn ferries. What is it that occurred during that period that made the MBTA realize, hey, this is maybe something we should hold on to? This is something we should hire a director of ferry operations for, but really grow that network. Because, truth be told, save for the Green Line extension and South Coast Rail, there hasn't been a lot of growth with the rail system. So seeing the ferry system grow, it's great seeing additional communities being brought into our network. So I guess, how is it that those two in particular, and I guess others along the way, were allowed to persist, and what was that motivation?
It's really fascinating. And obviously, I wasn't around in 1630, so I can't go back that far. But I will go back a little bit in history, because actually, when you step back and take a look, all of the routes that we have now kind of organically grew up that way. And so a lot of different people have a lot of different perspective on the history of ferries. But the Hingham Ferry has been the foundation of our business for a long time. My perspective on the Hingham Ferry is that its modern era began in the 80s with the expansion of the Southeast Expressway. They greatly expanded the Hingham Ferry service as mitigation for construction on the Southeast Expressway. Wow,
history repeats itself.
It sounds familiar, doesn't it? So I still have people on the Hingham Ferry that I talk to and say, I've been taking the ferry ever since they were doing the Southeast Expressway mitigation project. Obviously, not a lot of those people around, but there are a lot of people who are now riding the Hingham Ferry for a very long time. And as you say, have persisted with it. So each of the routes has kind of grown up and has a lot of longevity because of demand and just kind of real desire for people to use the services. And we've seen that now with all the routes. Charlestown is a little bit different in that it's an inner harbor service, but it has great ridership across the harbor, year-round service. People really depend on that service that live in Charlestown. And it's also a mainstay of moving tourists over to the Constitution. So we have a lot of tourists on the Charlestown route. But to your point about the Lynn and the East Boston and now the Winthrop and Quincy routes, there's just been a groundswell of support and organic, kind of demand and desire for those services to exist. And the ridership just is growing exponentially on each of those routes. On the Lynn Ferry, we added weekend service last year. And the story that I like to tell is that we had no idea how many people were going to ride the Lynn Ferry. You can do all of the analysis and all of the ridership projections, but it comes down to, is anybody going to ride it? And there's a Facebook page where the Lynn Ferry folks post. And I remember on the first Saturday of Memorial Day weekend, when we started the service, there was a post very early in the morning from a person on the first ferry on Saturday going into Boston. And the woman posted, "It's just me and my dog on the boat. You guys better get out here and ride the boat. Otherwise, they're going to take it away." And my heart sank. I was just terrified that no one was going to ride the boat. And oh boy, was I wrong. I had nothing to worry about. The Lynn Ferry weekend ridership was through the roof through the whole summer. Lots of families, lots of people using it to get into the city. And the interesting thing in talking to the people on the Lynn Ferry on the weekends is that if they didn't use the Lynn Ferry, they would have driven. And so kind of really excited to see that modal shift of getting people out of their cars because there's no traffic. You could drive into the city. Yeah, you have to pay for parking, but they're not being pushed to the ferry because of a whole lot of external factors. They're coming to the ferry because it's good public transit. And we're offering a way to get into the city and do what you need to do, in a convenient way and really an enjoyable way. There's nothing like getting out there on the water and experiencing it. So we've seen that on the East Boston route, on the Winthrop and Quincy routes. Some of the other routes offer really a connection between 2 points that isn't easy. For example, Winthrop to the seaport. If you live in Winthrop and you work in the seaport, it's really tough to get there. You can do a 2 or 3 seat ride with the Silver Line and the Blue Line and stuff like that, but it's a little bit of a hassle. But now with this Winthrop service, you can get from Winthrop to the seaport in 20 minutes. And those people that work in the seaport are thrilled, and they're going to be pushing for more service and more boats, and they're just loving that route. So it's great to be able to offer a route that not only offers, a kind of a more traditional alternate route into Boston, but also expands on some of the point-to-point connections that are more difficult on just a land-based transportation.
Anecdotally, I lived in East Boston when the East Boston ferry arrived, and tragically too short of a commute, which are words that you don't hear people say very often. But it was amazing. It was a great way to just get dropped off right over by the aquarium over there, and then ended up relocating to the North Shore. And then I became a Lynn Ferry guy. And again, despite being significantly longer, it's just one of those superbly pleasant experiences when you think about getting from point A to point B. Even my family now, when they come up, my mother's coming up a few days from now, and she already asked me if the ferries were running and when she could hop on, because it's that enjoyable of a ride, which I think says something so much about the ferry system. It is an experience unto itself, and it is so unique, and it's a great way to just have that moment of zen, whether you're going into the city or out of the city, and have that beautiful view of the ocean, of the city, and everything else that's around us, which you don't normally get if you're stuck bumper to bumper on your way in.
I'll let you know a little secret. My official title, if you go into the state database of who I am, is Director of Commuter Ferry. I actually, with the agreement of everyone in the building, I have unofficially changed my title to Director of Ferry Operations, because that's really what I do. But also, I wanted to take commuter out of my title because, to your point, we are so much more than a commuter service. Like my story about the Lynn Ferry weekend ridership, we're serving a much broader clientele than just commuters. Obviously, the Hingham to Rose Wharf service that we have, which is the highest portion of our ridership, is commuters. We're bringing thousands of people in every day from Hingham to Rose Wharf and back in the evening. So that's the mainstay of our business. But we have a ton of day trippers and families and people just looking to get out and either get into the city or get around. And then tourism. Both the East Boston and Charlestown service has a ton of people on it that are visitors to the city and looking for a way to get around. And that's really exciting. So it's really a unique service. We have a lot of people who get on the ferry and ride to nowhere. They ride from Lynn to Boston. They don't get off the ferry, and they ride back to Lynn. One of the unique things we have now that we're seeing an uptick in is there's a bike path that goes from near the Encore Casino all the way up to Lynn, right near the ferry terminal. So what people do is they ride their bike from Boston to Lynn, and then they take the ferry back, or vice versa. We have bike racks on the ferry, so you can bring your bike, and the larger ferries, the Lynn ferries, the Hingham ferries, have a snack bar and an alcoholic bar, so you can have a cocktail and have a snack and enjoy the scenery, like you say, and make it an enjoyable ride. So really kind of interesting public transit service where we're attracting people who might not actually be going to a destination. They're just coming for the experience, which is really, really neat and really good to see.
It's definitely an experience to have, and I completely understand those who are just hopping on to stay on and go back to their car on the way back, because it's that enjoyable of a ride. And if you can get a snack and something else to go with it along the way, why not?
And if you've never seen the city from the water, you really need to do that. It is really a different perspective on the city. It's really quite something to see the planes taking off from Logan, see all the cargo ships and all the different fishing boats out there. And maybe you can occasionally see some wildlife too.
You touched on this as far as the percentage of ridership that the ferry comprises, but how many people, how many trips are we talking here?
Last year, in calendar year 2024, we did 1.4 million trips. So it's not insignificant. We move a lot of people. Our ridership over the course of a year is a bell curve. We spike in July and August between the weekend service that we're offering and the spike in the weekday ridership. We have a lot of people on those summer months. It tapers off in the shoulder seasons and over the winter, but there is still a core group of people who are riding and commuting from Hingham and Hull year round. It's not insignificant. A lot of people depend on us to get to work, and the ridership is growing very rapidly, especially on the expansion routes.
And it's great because it shows that the demand is there, even in communities that are served by other MBTA modes like Quincy, like Lynn. There is still that other group that either prefers to take that route or truthfully, it might just be the best option for them. It might make sense to hop on the bus to then get on the ferry or what have you. So it's great to see that in so many of the communities that the ferry is serving, those communities are growing. So I can only imagine that the interest and desire and need for ferry service will only increase in those newly welcomed communities.
Yeah, the great example of that is, of course, the Marina Bay community, which is now really, transit-oriented development and kind of in a reverse way. The ferry dock at Squantum Point, right next to Marina Bay, was actually built to ferry workers from Quincy over to Deer Island for the construction of the Deer Island wastewater treatment plant. So that ferry dock has been there since then, and it's offered service into the city on an occasional basis over the years until that Winthrop Quincy ferry came around, and then we took that over. But those people in Marina Bay are just thrilled to have the ferry right there, 5-minute walk to the ferry, and then be able to get into the city. And then the reverse is true too. Marina Bay has a great collection of restaurants and entertainment venues. So you can leave the city, go down to Marina Bay for dinner, and if the ferry's done for the day, then, catch the red line back in the city. So, yeah, like you say, some really unique use cases for another alternate transit mode that we can offer with the MBTA's other regular subway, light rail, bus, and commuter rail.
And you can buy a ticket with the same M-Ticket app, correct?
Yes, the tickets for the ferry are on M-Ticket, and we also accept any of the commuter rail passes on the same zone structure as the commuter rail. For Lynn, whatever the zone is in Lynn, it's the same on the commuter rail and on ferry. So there's fair integration to a certain extent. We don't accept stored value Charlie cards. We don't have a way to tap like you do at a subway gate. It's the same as commuter rail. We need something that our staff and crew can look at to make sure that you paid your fare. But most boats also sell tickets on board. So you can walk up and buy a ticket at the ticket window in Hingham. We have a big terminal down in Hingham, or right on board the boat and be on your way.
So for people who don't know what to expect when they're going on board a vessel, again, I remember switching to bus for the first time, switching to commuter rail for the first time. It's a different experience. So for those who like to be a little bit more prepared before stepping on board, what sort of amenities does the ferry have, both, I guess, onshore and on vehicle as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. The ferry experience is just so much different than any other transit experience. And I split it up in my head. Well, I guess now it's in 3 categories. We have the longer distance, larger boats that run from Hingham and Hull and Lynn. Those boats are very comfortable, big boats with tables that you can sit at, kind of similar to a commuter rail style seating and arrangement. But those also have the full stocked bar and snack bar. So you can get beer, wine, alcoholic beverages, spirits. They also have outdoor seating and outdoor standing areas, and then they have fully accessible restrooms. So it is a very comfortable experience on those larger boats. You're on board those boats for a little longer. Some of the routes, you might be on the boat for 40 or even 50 or 60 minutes. So we do want to offer a comfortable service on those boats. The next category in my head is the new Winthrop and Quincy route, which isn't quite as long distance as Hingham, Hull, or Lynn, but it's a little bit longer than the inner harbor boats. So those boats you might be on for 20 or 30 minutes. Those boats have accessible restrooms, but they don't offer a bar or any kind of snack bar or any kind of amenities like that. The seating is a little bit more like a bus, a little bit more spacious than a bus, but there's no tables. There is an upper deck on a couple of those boats. So you can sit outside on a couple of those boats, which is comfortable and really enjoyable on the warm weather days. And then the third category in my head is the inner harbor boats. And those are the boats that do the East Boston and the Charlestown runs. And those, you're only on the boat for 10 minutes. They do not have a bathroom. They do have seating both inside and on the top deck outside. There's really no other amenities. It's a short trip. You're only on board for a few minutes. And in terms of on the shore side, in Hingham, we have a large terminal building with an indoor waiting area and a ticket window and bathrooms inside the Hingham terminal. Pretty much at all of our other locations, it's really just a dock. Some of them have a bus type shelter, but for the most part, it's really just kind of a bus stop for a boat. So the amenities are pretty limited. That's another thing that I would love to see us do a better job with some more support on the shore side for shelter from weather and stuff like that. But that will come.
So, as you mentioned, we are officially in ferry season for 2025, but the spring service changes also included some meaningful ferry adjustments as well. How is it that ferry planning and scheduling make these decisions, and how do they interact with other modes of transit from the MBTA?
So that's another thing that I've been able to focus on that was really not able to be looked at before I was around, is that kind of connection with the bus primarily. And that's exciting to be able to offer people a way to use transit without having to have a car at either end or having to walk at either end. So yeah, part of my job is transit planning and scheduling, and I'm the primary one, creating the schedules with Boston Harbor City Cruises' help. The most recent change that we made was the new Winthrop and Quincy routes being separating from each other.
Huge.
And the original structure of the Winthrop-Quincy route was one boat running a Winthrop to Quincy to Boston circuit. And the problem with that is that Winthrop and Quincy are not really next to each other.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit inconvenient for the Winthrop people and the Quincy people to be going in that direction. So with the support of the Healy Driscoll administration, with the support of MassDOT, we were able to go out on the used vessel market and find a couple of ferries down in New York, actually, purchase those ferries, get them rehabbed, get them brought up to our standards, and bring them up here for this season. And that enabled us to be able to break up this one route that was being run with one boat. And now we have 3 boats for the route. So 2 boats in service every weekday with 1 boat as the backup. And then on the weekend, we'll revert back to 1 boat doing a circle for some weekend service for the first time this year. So a lot of coordination went into looking at that route. The primary thing that we had to do was deconflict all of the ferry usage of the Seaport terminal. The Seaport stop is inside the little basin, the little marina right in front of the ICA, and that dock gets a lot of use. There is a North Station to Seaport Ferry, and there's an East Boston to Seaport Ferry that are operated by the Mass Convention Center and the Seaport TMA. And those ferries have been using that dock for a long time. So we had to make sure that we were not all using the dock at the same time. So a lot of planning and deconflicting there. And because of that, we weren't really able to make the times coordinate too well with the bus schedule in Winthrop. We took a look at it, but it was really just not possible to make as meaningful and as good a connection with the bus in Winthrop. And at the Marina Bay location, we don't yet have a bus operating to Marina Bay. So talking to the bus people, that's on the wish list of things for in the future, is to get a bus connection at the Squantum Point Pier in Marina Bay. But one of the things we've done in the recent months is get better connections for the bus in Hull. The 714 bus in Hull is a contracted service, and I've been working closely with the folks in the contracted bus department to make sure that we can offer connections, timed connections, so that people can use the bus to get to the ferry and then can get off the ferry and use the bus to get around town. Hull is really a unique use case for the ferry. For many of the people on that peninsula that is Hull, it is just almost near impossible to get into the city at rush hour. You've got to drive all the way down through Hingham, and then after 10, 20 minutes of getting to Hingham, you still got a long way to go to get into Boston. So the Hull ferry is really a mainstay of people's lives and work lives. And most of them drive and park at the ferry terminal. But with a bus running down the spine of the whole town of Hull, that whole peninsula, we're really trying to encourage people to, use the bus, walk from their house to the bus. The bus drops you off right at the ferry dock, and then make it so that we can make those connections for people and not have them have to rely on their cars so much. So we've made some improvements. It's tough because the bus has a schedule it has to keep, and the ferry has a schedule it has to keep, and it's not always perfect, but we've been successful in making some better connections there. So, hopefully in the future we can have more boats and more buses and make it even better.
And what has the reception been from our riders? So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think with Winthrop and Quincy, with the addition of the new vessels, as well as re-triangulating their routes, we were able to double the amount of service for weekday trips, and you're also reducing travel time. And then you're also taking in now considerations for buses lining up in Hull and elsewhere. How is the public responding? You mentioned you hear from them, you handle some of these inquiries. What are you hearing so far?
Yeah, most of the time it's really good. Everybody loves the boats. It's very popular. Once you've gotten on the ferry, you can realize how enjoyable a way it is to commute and to get around Boston. So a lot of positive feedback. I will say that before we were able to break up the Winthrop and Quincy route, there was some frustration at how that route was operated and the length of time that it took, especially for the Winthrop people who were traveling through Quincy to get into town. So we get our fair share of frustrated customers, but in this case, we were able to offer them a solution and make things a little bit better. So yeah, for the most part, it's very positive feedback. The ferry has a really good performance metrics in terms of on-time performance and getting people where they need to be when they need to be. There's not a lot of things out there on the water that delay us, although we should talk about the right whale, and that is a factor. But the overwhelming reception is positive. People love the ferry. They really do enjoy the commute. And it's really neat to see in the afternoon, there really are some neat communities that develop on the boat of people who don't necessarily live near each other or work near each other, but they're friends on the boat, and they all get together and chat and have some social time on the boat on the way home, especially. And so that's neat to see.
That is an excellent point about that potential for community that these vessels create.
Yeah, I mean, it helps to have a bar on the boat, and the boats all, have an outdoor seating or standing area, so you can really get out there and enjoy the good weather, especially as it starts to get warmer here in the spring and into the summer. We get a lot of people standing outside and chatting and enjoying the view.
And sometimes that view might include a whale tail. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Last year we had the humpback whale who hung around in the harbor for a couple of months. This year on the Lynn Ferry route, we have right whales. And this is a very unique situation. The Lynn Ferry transits across a body of water called Broad Sound. Broad Sound is the kind of open ocean piece of water that's just off Revere Beach. So for 5 miles from Deer Island to just off Nahant, the Lynn Ferry is in open ocean. We have seen right whales in this area. The right whales migrate. They spend the winter down in Florida, and then they migrate up towards Canada. So they're on the move during this time of year, and they do get spotted. Now, the concern with the right whales is it's a critically endangered species. There are only 300 or 350 animals left on the planet. And the problem with the right whale is that they like to stay at the surface. They are very slow moving, and they don't have a fin on the back of their body, so they're very difficult to see. So ship strikes are a big cause of death for the right whales. So our partners at NOAA have implemented a number of mandatory speed zones and some areas of voluntary speed reductions when whales are sighted. And that's what we're dealing right now. I think it was the middle of April, right whales were spotted by our ferry crews, and there was enough of the right whales that NOAA implemented a voluntary speed reduction down to 10 knots in this area. And to be a good citizen, we're going to adhere to that voluntary speed restriction. We do not want to get tangled up with whales and cause any harm to this species. So it has meant that the Lynn Ferry is now operating an alternate schedule with a much longer transit time. The transit time went from 35 or 40 minutes up to about 60 minutes. So the trip does take longer, but we're doing the right thing. We're keeping the whales safe. The other thing I'll mention is that because Boston Harbor City Cruises operates whale watch trips, all of the captains at Boston Harbor City Cruises go through a special training program on how to watch for them, observe them, and then maneuver around them. So that's a real benefit that we're able to have, where our captains have a little bit more training than they would if they were just only running MBTA ferry service. They know what to look for, they're well trained, and we're pretty confident we can stay safe.
That's excellent, because we have a responsibility to get riders where they need to go, but it's also so important to be good stewards of the environment. And anecdotally, people don't seem to mind as much as some I think we're anticipating. We've put out several messages on social media and the like, and people are almost excited, again, because it is an enjoyable ride. People don't mind spending a little extra time at sea. Maybe it gives them time for an extra snack or something else. But it's good to see that, when the need arises, people are willing to rise to do the right thing, like yourself and the captains and crews out there working on behalf of the T, but also the continued patience of riders who understand that there are certain things outside of our control and that this is the right thing to do to keep these animals safe.
Yeah, I was really expecting the ridership to drop a lot more precipitously than it did drop. It did drop off. Not everyone has the time to do a longer commute, but it's still not an extremely long commute. It's probably competitive with driving at that time, especially in the midweek times. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of people have been receptive. We got some educational materials from NOAA about the whales. We put it out on the boats to kind of talk people through what we're dealing with and why and what the whales look like. You can't frequently see the whales from the ferry, but we're always looking, and occasionally, if you're lucky, you do get to spot one.
So it sounds like things are going fairly well for the ferry. There has been expansion. Even routes that were existing have been improved upon. Frequency has increased. That means there's also increased interest in other people joining that MBTA ferry community and kind of opening their shores to the MBTA. What are some of the possibilities that you're most excited about?
Like you say, there has been, kind of really rapid expansion over the past few years. Yeah. Even 4 years ago, we were really only operating the Hingham Hull route and the Charlestown route. And now we have East Boston, Lynn, Winthrop, Quincy. It's pretty exciting to be able to expand that rapidly and to stand it up and operate it with good success. There's a couple of things that we can do. There's untapped potential in expanding those routes, whether it's a longer service day or more frequent service to all of those destinations. Right now, all of those new routes are seasonal, so we're not operating them through the winter. So there's, opportunities to see if we can get some year-round ridership. The problem with expanding to year-round, for example, on that Lynn Ferry, is because it's in the open ocean, we might have to more frequently cancel the service because of storms. We can run in pretty heavy weather, but at some point it becomes too dangerous or too uncomfortable for the passengers. So if we're going to expand to year-round service, that's a consideration. But beyond that, there are some other destinations which we can start to look at. Salem, of course, operates their own ferry. That's not an MBTA ferry. They operate that through their city. But once you get past Lynn and Salem, and then once you get past, Hingham and Hull, it gets a little bit more difficult to justify because it's such a long duration trip and it is out in the open ocean. So we'll see. MassDOT is just starting a water transportation study that is going to look at some of these other destinations like Gloucester and places like that and see if it does make sense to operate a ferry service on those kind of longer distance routes. But I'm really more excited and more interested in improving the inner harbor service. That's where I see a lot of potential. There are a lot of places in the inner harbor that, like I said, with the Winthrop to Seaport connection, that it's much easier to make that connection on the water. Logan Airport I think there's a lot of untapped potential on Logan Airport. I'll give a plug for the ferry going to Logan Airport. If you do find yourself traveling out of Logan Airport and you can take the ferry to the Logan Airport dock, once you get on the bus, the shuttle bus that takes you from the ferry dock to the terminals, you will get a special ticket to go to the front of the line at the security screening checkpoint. It's a real nice benefit. We're trying to get people to take the ferry to the airport and reduce the amount of cars going over to Logan Airport. So every trip on the Winthrop and Quincy route now stops at Logan Airport. So we're excited to have them be able to have some better service from Winthrop and Quincy. And I think that we can expand the inner harbor connection to Logan Airport, shuttling people from the different locations where there's a cluster of hotels. And then beyond just Logan Airport, there's the Seaport, there's East Boston. Right now, we operate to one location in East Boston. Maybe there's a possibility to operate at other locations in East Boston. Maybe there's a possibility to run up to Everett or Chelsea. Maybe there's a possibility to expand service in Charlestown, go up the Mystic River a little bit. And the North End. Right now, we come into Long Wharf in kind of the central downtown area, but maybe there's an opportunity to get to the North End. Like I said, there's another operator who operates to the North Station, right behind North Station, so you can go from North Station to the Seaport, but that's really designed for commuters. It's only operated at rush hour. So there's a lot of opportunities to kind of invent some kind of circulator service or some kind of pulse and star type of topology network that could bring people into a central location and then pulse them back out to all of these different inner harbor locations. So there's a lot of opportunity, and the challenge is going to be the dock space and the boats. You know, we don't have to build tracks, we don't have to acquire right of way, but we do have to find dock space and we do have to find boats to expand service. So that'll be a challenge, but I'm looking forward to that challenge. Looking forward to what the water transportation study finds out about all these ideas, and then how can we implement them, and let's get it going.
So for those who have not yet braved the high seas with you and your team, what would you say to the rider that's never taken the ferry that would encourage them to hop on board?
Clearly, if you're in the close towns around Hingham or around Lynn, then sure, instead of driving in, instead of taking the commuter rail, come on down. The parking at Hingham is $2. The parking in Lynn is free. Give it a try for a commute. But even more so, if you live in Lowell, if you live in Worcester, if you live in Middleborough, if you live somewhere far away from the water and you've never thought about the ferry, come try it out on the weekend. If you have a family, if you have a date, if you just want to come by yourself, drive to Hingham, drive to Lynn, look up the schedules on the website. You'll have a great time. You will really enjoy getting into Boston on the boat. You'll get to see the city in a different way. You get to pass through the Boston Harbor Islands, which is an incredible national park that we could spend another hour talking about. And you'll get to see some really neat stuff. I'm not so much interested in building up the ridership from the towns around the terminals that are already very popular. They know about the ferry. They've heard. The people in town talk about them. So the people in Weymouth, the people in Hingham, the people in Quincy, they know about the ferry. I'm more interested in attracting people from Newton or Framingham or Worcester or something. Shoot down 128, come over to Hingham, park in the lot. It's a giant lot. Lynn has a giant lot. Jump on the boat and come into the city for the day, and you will have a great experience.
David, thank you so much for taking the time to talk all things ferry with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks to David Perry for joining us and sharing his perspective on the future of ferry service at the T. Whether you're commuting, sightseeing, or just looking for a new way to get around, it might be time to hop on board. As always, thank you to our listeners. If you have questions, feedback, or ideas for future episodes like this one, you can reach us at social@mbta.com. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, I'm Andrew Cassidy, and this has been Spilling the Tea.